Welcome to 5 after midnight, where darkness is upon us, and so are those that lurk within its shadows. Number 1.
Back in the 80s, my friends were in New Orleans working on a movie. She and her husband had rented a furnished 150-year-old house in the Garden District. I went down to visit them during the jazz festival. The house was huge, and I had my own bedroom with a 14-foot ceiling and a balcony that you accessed through unique windows that I have only ever seen in New Orleans houses. Closed, the window looked like a French door, but the entire window can be raised and disappears into the upper wall, and then you can walk through the window opening out into the balcony. It was a muggy night, and I had all of the windows open the first night that I slept there. Sometime during the night, I suddenly woke up because my sheet had been pulled off of me very quickly. I jumped out of bed, thinking that someone had come into my bedroom through the huge windows that were open. I could see through into the dark room to see that no one was in my room, and after a few minutes of staring out the windows and seeing no one, I realized that what just happened did not warrant me waking up my friends to alert them to a possible intruder in the house. So I closed all the windows, and I go back to bed. It takes me a while to fall asleep, but I do, and again I am awakened by my sheet being pulled off of me. This time I am really freaked out, and I don't care that my friends are sleeping. I wake them up to tell them what happened. My friends then tell me that they also have had weird shit happen to them in this house since they moved in, but they have just kind of ignored it. They've heard things like strange footsteps, voices in other rooms, stuff like that. No sheets getting pulled off of them at night, though. It's about 4 a.m. now, and no way am I going back to bed. We all decide to go to a cafe for coffee, and then just start the next day extra early. It was Saturday morning, and we were going to the Jazz Fest later in the day. At the Jazz Fest, there is an arts and crafts area where you can buy lots of local artist craft stuff. We come upon a booth where there is a woman selling very unique tables inlaid with handmade ceramic tiles. We noticed her wares right away because there is an inland tile coffee table in the house that my friends are renting that looks just like the tables this woman is selling. We start chatting up the woman and tell her about the funny coincidence that one of these coffee tables is in the rental house we're in. She asks where the house is, and we tell her. She tells us that she grew up in that house and that is where one of the first inlaid tables she ever made was. I jokingly ask her if she has ever run into any ghosts in that house, because there seems to be one in there right now who wants my ass out of that bedroom. She tells me, that's why my father doesn't live there anymore. He moved out and left all of the furniture and just rents the place out. My mother committed suicide in that house several years ago, and she would not leave my father alone after she died. He could not stand it any longer, so he moved out.
Number 2.
Although this doesn't frighten me now, and every time I go back home I try to catch it again, when I was younger, this scared the crap out of me. I was maybe 10 years old, and I woke up in the middle of the night to see a man standing in the doorway of my bedroom. He was dressed in what looked like some old army outfit. I was too young at the time to know what he was wearing, but I'll get to that in a minute. He just stood there looking at me for a few seconds, then began looking around the room. After a minute, he walked away. I thought at first it was my father. I got up to see what he wanted. But when I looked out into the hallway, there was no one there. I made my way to my parents' bedroom, where I found my father fast asleep. I didn't really think anything of it and went back to bed. About a week later, I told the story of what happened to a friend of mine. His grandfather, who was the town historian, overheard and began telling me the story that my house used to be a Union hospital during the Civil War. About 15 years before my family moved into the house, a psychic was called in because various previous occupants noticed the same thing. The psychic said that there was a spirit in the house of a Union soldier, which explained the odd attire. He was informed that his brother was in the hospital and he was trying to find him, but the soldier died of wounds he sustained in battle before he found him. His spirit still haunts my old home, trying to find his brother.
Number 3.
A year or so ago, my computer was set up in the dining room, so I would frequently be down there well into the night. One of those nights, around 3 or 4 a.m., the entire house, save for the dining room, was completely dark, and I was feeling tired, so I shut off my computer and turned off the light to head upstairs. I was just about to put my foot on the first step when something grabbed my ankle. I whipped around to see this large, glowing, white humanoid mass laying on the floor, dripping with slime. It looked like a half-rotted corpse, but was much larger than the average person, and it smelt so strongly of dead animal that I gagged. I pulled my foot away and rushed up the stairs, panicking, then stopped on the landing to look back. It was standing up, and it must have been about 10 feet tall, and it was reaching out toward me with this huge gaping mouth and dark holes where its eyes should have been, wailing loudly. It tried to climb the stairs, but when it put its foot thing on the first step, it started bubbling and lurched backwards, then pointed at me, and gradually stopped glowing, then sank into the living room. Immediately, I turned on the hall light, and nothing was there. I wasn't sick, injured, feverish, delirious, or intoxicated in any way. This memory still terrifies me.
Number 4.
During my high school days and college years, I was avidly into the occult and paranormal. I found it fascinating. I was so interested that I co-founded and later became president of the Paranormal Club at my school. The club was great and the members were an awesome group of people. We quickly became the most popular and powerful club on campus. Being in the club, we did investigations. This is where popular businesses and property owners would let us into their building to try to collect evidence. We acted professional, did background on the client and structure in question, always went into an investigation expecting nothing and looking for common solutions. Some investigations were outdoors on public roads. We called these urban myth nights and normally used them as a training ground for new members. One of these spots in question is what completely changed my outlook on life. This road, we called it Dark Road, was in the middle of the roads next to a river. I took a small group out there which consisted of 2 new members, myself, a self-proclaimed psychic that was already a member of the club. While out there, we would use instruments like a K2 meter, EMF meter, DVR, and a camera to take pictures. While first out there, we noticed fog in the pictures and thought this was fishy because we could see no fog around. But we dismissed it because we're next to a river late at night. Our psychic kept looking into the woods and talking to someone, saying, "It's okay, come on out. We just want to talk to you." I thought this was funny until I looked into the woods and could see the bushes and a tree limb moving around. I thought this was an animal until I heard the child's laughter, and eventually I saw herself. Now, the best way to describe this is if you see someone from afar walking to you and they're nothing but a shadow with a little bit of definition. She, which was explained to me by the psychic, did not come any closer, and we got nothing else the rest of the night. Because of this, we packed up and left. On Halloween night, I wanted to test the theory that spiritual activity is at its peak. So I went back to Dark Road and took a small group of friends with me who were interested in the subject. That night, I only had a K2 meter. While there, I got the best results with it that I've ever seen in my entire life. I use it for answering questions. Lights to green mean yes, and no lights mean no. Mind you, I'm in the middle of the woods with no power lines around me, and this thing is giving me immediate answers. It's almost as if I'm having a conversation with someone sitting in front of me. So anyway, I asked the typical yes or no questions, such as, are you a male? No lights. Are you a female? Lights up to green. Are you young? Lights up to green. Are you in your 20s? No lights. Are you a little girl? Lights up to green. Can you make the lights go green twice and yellow once? The lights go green twice, then yellow once. Then I ask, for some odd reason, how she died. I don't even know why I said this, because I quickly realized that this was not a yes or no answer. Quickly, a girl behind me said, "Oh God," and covered her face. She opened her hands from her face to show that her nose was gushing blood right after I'd asked the question. We all stayed calm, and I wrapped up the session and we went home. The girl was fine, but a little freaked out. She also told me that she hadn't had a bloody nose in 4 years. So finally, I planned an all-out investigation on the place. We have all the cameras, IR lights, DVR, K2, EMF, digital thermometer, and I made sure that I had 3 groups covering the place. Before, I said that I had a self-proclaimed psychic with me that went the first time that we went there, and her name was Sue. This time, I decided to bring her and Mary, a friend of mine who has very impressive credentials, to be called a psychic. I put Mary and Sue in different cars, and I didn't let them talk to each other or even see each other. I had the car convoy do a slow drive through Dark Road for the psychics, so I could test their credibility. After the ride, I talked to both Sue and Mary, and they both gave me descriptions and names of spirits at the same spots. One in particular was a man. The man's name was Jeremiah, and this name came from both psychics. The both of them explained that he was a bad man. He raped, killed, and tortured women. They told me that he liked it and that he also got away with it. Before the investigation even got underway, the one psychic, Sue, said that she was unable to go on because Jeremiah was so strong and evil that it made her sick. She waited off of the road in a car the remainder of the night. During the investigation, Mary told us that there were 3 spirits following us around. Their names were Sarah, Nancy, and an American Indian whose name we couldn't pronounce, so we called her Brave Spirit. Towards the end of the night, we had no evidence, and we were ready to leave. All of a sudden, 2 girls, one of them Mary, complained of an awful back pain that had both of them doubled over. Mary could do nothing but look at me with a little smile and say, "It's Jeremiah." Because their backs were in pain, I had them stand straight up and put their backs to me and another male investigator. I said out loud that if there is anything here hurting these girls, you are not allowed to, so please leave. At that moment, we heard a big, loud, "Fuck you!" come from right, and immediately I felt as if someone was in my face yelling at me. Now, I'm a big guy, and I've had my fair share of fights, so I'm pretty intimidating guy to meet for the first time. So I started yelling at this thing to leave. I used a few choice words, and it felt like I was in an argument with someone who wanted to beat the hell out of me. Finally, after fighting with what seemed like nothing for 20 minutes, Mary said, "Okay, he's gone." We were all excited, and we stood up and we went home with our heads held high. The whole night, I treated this Sarah spirit like she was a little sister to me. I didn't ignore her at all, and Mary had to interpret what Sarah was saying to me. At the end of the night, Mary helped Sarah cross over to the next plane. Well, we found Sarah on a digital recording. I'm saying, "Sarah, I need you to light up these lights like you did for me on Halloween. Can you do that? Pretty please?" You then hear a faint noise that you have to listen to carefully, but when you do, you can clearly hear a frustrated little girl say, "I'm trying!" This was a great feeling to me because I felt like I actually helped someone who needed me. Next, we had the Nancy spirit following her around, another investigator, because Mary said that Nancy thought he was cute. In another voice recording, you hear me say, "Can you give me a name?" And then, as plain as day, you hear "Nancy." If you heard it, you might shit yourself how clear it is. Lastly, the bad part. I get a call a few months after the investigation from Mary's mother. She says to me, "Mary's been having some trouble from Jeremiah, I hear." She said this jokingly, and the name Jeremiah didn't click with me immediately because I didn't have any friends with that name. I said, "Oh yeah?" And she said, "Yeah, Mary's father even saw him standing at her door, banging on it, smiling." This is when it clicked, and my whole way of thinking changed. Turns out this Jeremiah followed Mary home and tricked us. Mary went days without sleep because all she could hear is him screaming in her face while she tried to go to sleep. Mary is fine now. She took it professionally, and she had the situation taken care of by her psychic coach. The moral of this story, I learned that there are things that we don't understand, and sometimes we shouldn't. We aren't invincible, and shouldn't be fucking around with things if we don't know how to completely handle them. Personally, I hope no one believes me and people go on thinking that these things don't exist. I wish I didn't believe me. I have trouble sleeping at night because it always feels like someone is watching me. I never did an investigation after I heard that news, nor do I even mention the things that I've seen or heard. I'm not here to tell you to believe in ghosts, because I don't care what you believe in. Whether you believe in them or not, they are real, and they are everywhere. Ghosts exist, whether you like it or not.
Number 5.
When I was entering the 5th grade, my dad's company gave him an opportunity to transfer to an overseas job in Florence, Italy. My parents obviously jumped at the chance, and we lived over there for 3 years, which was an awesome experience for the most part. The first few months we lived in an apartment, and then we moved out to a small town in Tuscany, where my father's company basically paid for us to live in this awesome Italian villa. I mean 7 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms, the biggest house I'd ever seen. We get to speaking to the farmer who works at the olive orchards around the house and who knows the family who has owned it for centuries, and find out that the oldest part of the house was a 500-year-old hunting lodge. and then the rest of the villa was built around it in the late 1700s. Since we were renting it, it came furnished with all sorts of cool old furniture, art, etc. My father, in a conversation with the neighbors, heard from them that some anecdotal stories about the monk ghost who haunted the house, guarding some forgotten treasure or some such bullshit, or so he thought. And he told my mom, but they didn't tell me or my sister because they didn't think it was a true story, and they didn't want to freak my sister and I out. The first thing I remember being weird about the villa was that I was never comfortable being alone there. I've always been a very solitary person my entire life, and I usually enjoy time by myself. However, I can remember right up from the start that any time my parents would leave me alone there, I would feel like I was being watched and there was another presence in the house. I spent months convincing myself that it was just nerves, that I wasn't used to living there, or that the huge size of the house was freaking me out. Then I noticed that our 6 cats would act strange sometimes, staring at empty spaces, running up to a spot like they would to a person when there was nothing there, but it seemed like only I noticed them doing it when I was there alone. By the end of our first year in the house, I was terrified of being left alone, and my parents treated me like I was crazy. And whenever I was there by myself, which was rarely, I would lock myself in my bedroom with 1 or more cats who I thought could protect me. I don't know why or how, it just seemed like a good idea at the time. At the same time, I started noticing noises at night. Scrapings, clawings, that sort of stuff. But when I would freak out, my dad would come and remind me that the house was hundreds of years old and there were probably mice, bats, and other critters above my room making the noises. It made sense to me, but I can't even begin to recount how many nights I got woken up by these strange noises that seemed too loud or persistent to be a mouse. I started to occasionally hear random doors shutting, those sorts of things. But by this point, I just kept it to myself, because my parents were already treating me like I was crazy. After about a year of living in this villa, our relatives started to fly over from the States to come and visit us. I mean, they basically got a free vacation in Tuscany for just the price of a plane ticket. So we had guests at least once a month, if not more. The first major incident that I remember was when my aunt and uncle and my 2 cousins came and visited, and stayed in the apartments that were originally the 2nd floor of the hunting lodge. I'll mention briefly that it seemed a majority of the incidents, noises, etc. seemed to all originate from the oldest part of the house, which was the first 3 floors of the original hunting lodge. The root cellar below it. There were 2 adjoining bedrooms, with a bathroom opening into the front bedroom, and my aunt and uncle slept in this front bedroom and my cousins in the back. Long story short, my cousin woke up to go pee at like 5 in the morning, walked into the bathroom half asleep, and saw a man standing in there, so he turned around and sat on the chair outside of the bathroom door. He had been sitting there for a couple of minutes when my aunt sat up and asked him what he was doing, and he told her, "Waiting for Dad to get out of the bathroom." To which she replied, "Dad is still in bed, right here." And he was. Needless to say, by the time breakfast came around, we had all heard the story, and it was at this point that my father finally made mention of the ghost stories he heard from the neighbor, and that supposedly this was the reason that the villa had been empty for all the years until we started renting it, because the last people to live there had been freaked out. I pretty much flipped my shit on all of them, because I felt like everything I had experienced finally made sense, and they had been making me feel insane by passing off my experiences as something I made up in my own head. After it was out in the open in my family, we all started noticing how frequently weird things happened in that house. Here are just a few examples. My sister had a slumber party for her birthday with 5 to 6 girls, and my mom sat out in the stairwell around midnight for a bit to make sure that they were all to bed. She started hearing furniture being dragged around and went in to see what the girls were up to, but they were all talking and no furniture was being moved. A week later, my parents had the owners come in and open up the 3rd floor of the hunting lodge, which were 2 rooms they kept locked up as storage, and inside there were several large wardrobes, dressers, and other pieces of furniture that had been dragged around at random, and you could see the trails through the dust where they had been moved. Anywhere from a few inches to several feet. The owners got mad at us, thinking that my sister or I had managed to break in and mess with their stuff, but the door was locked, and my dad pointed out that there were no footprints anywhere. The owners kind of freaked out, made a bunch of hurried excuses and dismissive gestures, and left pretty fast. This isn't nearly as convincing, but I always thought it was strange. In Italy, there were these barn owls that made this horrible screeching noise that I can only describe as a combination of a woman being murdered and the spawn of Satan. You can look it up if you don't believe me. But the weirdest thing was they would sit on our windowsills for hours at night, screaming repeatedly to the point where my entire family was at their wits' end. They would also fly into the window screens if we stood by the windows at night, like they wanted nothing better than to rip us apart. I swear to God this is true. It happened multiple times, including once when my dad was in the bathroom and left the window open. An owl hit the screen, and my dad always said that it scared him half to death. I hardly ever tell this story because I get completely creeped out, and I have goosebumps, and I'm shaking right now. And I've always felt like I've never been the same since we lived there. The strangest part was the feeling that you weren't alone. I never felt threatened physically by the presence, and for the last year we lived there, my parents would always refer to it as it or the friendly ghost. But I don't think it was friendly either. Whatever it was, it just watched us. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the show. If you have a story to share, send us an email, like us on Facebook, share, like, and subscribe.